I'm staying with my brother at a cabin in northern Idaho. The cabin sits tucked into Priest Valley in the Selkirk Range, a deep forest hollow, ringed by pines and rock faces. Its back to the mountains and its front looking down on a ribbon of stream cold as a knife. Both my brother, Aaron, and I are outdoors junkies, the kind of people who use paper maps more than social media. This was a textbook trip for us, poking around the woods, scrambling rocky trails, sniffing the scent of pine pitch, and keeping quiet to listen to the forest speak. The drive was long, and we split the wheel. But I handled most of it. So on the first day we took it slow, stuck close to the cabin, soaked up the scenery, and didn't go far. Around 5:30, Aaron stood up, stretched, and said he was going to take a quick walk before dark. I just grunted an okay, watching him through the doorway. A light jacket, no pack, no water bottle, meaning a short loop, a few hills, then back. I stayed on the sofa by the fireplace, listening to the wood snap and pop, my eyelids growing heavy. I'm not sure when night fell. Mountain shadow poured through the windows, and the lamplight retreated before a thick indigo. Only when the cabin was lit solely by the fire did a nagging emptiness jolt me awake. Aaron still wasn't back. Outside, the woods were so black the trail itself had vanished. I sat up fast. My hand found the day kit exactly. Folding knife, lighter, gauze, rescue whistle, throat lozenges. I snatched a headlamp and a flashlight. My first thought was bears. They're around here, and walking unarmed at dusk is a bad idea. I opened the door. The cold sliced my face. Stepping into the trees, I kept the light close to my chest, the beam splitting the dark in front of me. After a few minutes, the bear worry receded. Something else rose up. Unease. The feeling of being watched. Like a thin string tied to the nape of my neck, giving a little tug with every step. I glanced back a few times. The flashlight skimming trunks, brush, rocks. Nothing. Except the very thick, very dense silence of a cold forest. 10 minutes straight along the trail, I saw Aaron coming down toward me. He wasn't running, not panicking. But he was moving fast, shoulders hunched like someone trying to get away from something shadowing him. We spoke at the same time. I asked what was wrong. He said, "Turn around, back to the cabin." Without more questions, we just hurried on. Inside, bolt thrown, Aaron finally talked. His voice was lower than usual. Someone was there. He said someone was standing among the pines, watching. When he kept walking, that person shifted position to keep him in sight. Didn't follow directly behind, but paralleled him through the woods. Aaron was afraid that if he returned to the cabin while there was still light, the person would see the way and follow him right home. So he looped around to keep distance, waited for dark, then skirted along the edge of the forest to come back. And then, because he's the older brother, or because he wanted me less scared, he waved it off. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe just another hiker like us, with a cabin somewhere nearby. He said it, and I wanted to believe it. We made dinner, pasta with canned meat sauce, black coffee. Then out on the porch, sitting by the campfire. Neither of us said so, but we both looked into the woods more than usual, like we were waiting for a figure to appear between the trees. Wind spilled down from the mountains into the valley, carrying the scent of pine resin and something hollow. The sort of hollow that makes the flames gutter low, as if holding their breath. Night settled, and the quiet thickened. The stream turned into a single sliding line of sound in our ears. We sat late, then went to bed. In the morning, a quick breakfast, cornbread cakes, jerky, coffee. We set our main route, a rock slope up to a promontory overlooking all of Priest Valley. 6 hours up and back, enough effort that even words feel extravagant. The return dragged. The cabin appeared after a bend, its dark wooden roof half hidden in the trees. Aaron tossed his pack and said he was going to shower. The cabin has 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. I waited. I flopped onto the sofa, and the moment my head hit the cushion, an image flashed. The eyes in the forest Aaron had described last night. I jolted up, went to the window, and looked out at the trees beyond the porch. No one, just wind whispering through the pines. I went back to the sofa, and a strange feeling clawed the back of my neck. It took me a few minutes to name it. Then I realized the pump that feeds the shower wasn't running. This cabin's pump is loud as a sewing machine. Once it's on, you hear it. Now, grave quiet. Aaron? No answer. I stood. The short hallway to the bedrooms was darker than usual, even with the curtains open. Aaron? Still silence. I knocked lightly on the left bedroom door. No water, not a rustle. I crouched, cracked the door a few inches, just enough to see. Aaron was kneeling in the corner, facing me, eyes wide open, his gaze hard and straight as a needle. He shook his head, once, very decisively. No. Go. The fear in his eyes was so cold its chill cut into me like a blade. Even now, I still see it when I close my eyes. I opened the door wider and saw him. A man stood a few steps from Aaron. His eyes were wide too. Not confused, but tired and blank. Like someone who had been standing there for a very long time. His clothes were ragged and disheveled, his long black hair greasy, matted into streaks, his face a grayish pallor like damp moss. In that instant, there was no room for thought. My body lunged ahead of my mind, a straight line from the threshold to him. When only a few steps remained, his hand jerked up from his side. A handgun. I slammed my whole weight into him. Aaron sprang up like a coiled spring. Things crashed to the floor, a snarling rasp of bodies. We grappled, hands clawing at hands, knees banging into the edge of the bed. I clamped down on the wrist holding the gun, squeezed, feeling tendons and bones slide under skin. He screamed, a wordless, ragged sound, and thrashed in a frenzy. Aaron locked him from behind. I wrenched his wrist outward the way I'd learned in a self-defense class I'd taken half-heartedly. The gun fell onto the rug and skittered under the dresser. He didn't let up, didn't falter. It was as if pain meant nothing to him. It took a while, long as an hour, before we could breathe inside the struggle. The plan came through a look. Aaron was bigger, stronger. He would hold him. I would ready the car. I backed off one step, caught a breath, then ran. The front door flew open. The cold air slapped my face like opening my eyes underwater. I tossed the bag onto the seat, turned the key, heard the engine catch. I ran back into the cabin. We grabbed whatever we could find in the room, paracord, cloth strips, cargo ties. We bound him, not neat, not movie tight, just enough for us to get out. I snatched up the gun and stuffed it into my jacket pocket. As the door slammed, we heard him howling inside, a voice twisted between rage and some hollow, nameless thing. The dirt road trembled under the tires. When a sliver of cell signal finally wriggled into the corner of the screen, I dialed 911 with fingers still shaking. I gave the location, the description, the weapon, the situation, forcing my voice to stay level. They said a patrol would respond. When they arrived, the ropes we'd used were strewn across the floor, the door was ajar. But he was gone. On the drive back to town, Aaron told me. In the bathroom, he'd been caught cleanly, the muzzle pressed to his side. The man gestured, ordering him to call me into the room. Aaron refused. He understood that if he called, I would walk into the trap and our chance would be gone. Then I walked in on my own. We still talk about the moment I charged him as something we can't explain. Honestly, I can't explain it either. Maybe that very irrationality is what pulled us out of the cabin alive. The authorities took statements and the gun. Their only lead on his identity came from the firearm I turned in. They traced the registered owner, a man who had gone missing 5 years earlier, somewhere about 30 miles from the cabin. The description we provided didn't match the missing man, leading to a colder inference. The man who attacked us had likely attacked the gun's owner earlier and kept the weapon like a parasite, clinging to a bad memory. That's all. It would have taken just one variable to shift, a slower step, a single "come in" that I obeyed. And that could have been the fate of Aaron and me. In the days after, when night draped the tree line, I kept hearing a gust of wind, slightly out of rhythm in the forest. Like the breath of someone who has stood in one spot for a very long time, watching you through a slit of darkness between two pines. I dreamed again of the moment the door opened a few inches, of Aaron's staring eyes and that tiny, heart-stopping shake of his head. I dreamed of the glint of metal as the muzzle lifted from his side. I dreamed of the smell of damp fabric and a stranger's skin in a bedroom that should have held only two brothers. And in the midst of those dreams, I often woke with this thought. The forest isn't what's frightening. People are, especially the ones who know how to stand still, how to wait, and how to follow you home. We told everything, down to the second, to Idaho law enforcement, to the forest managers, to anyone who needed to know. No further leads. No one saw a man with long, greasy black hair, ragged clothes, and eyes blank as congealed roe. He dissolved into the woods like mist. But one thing didn't dissolve. His howl lodged in the throat like a stone stuck in a pipe. Every time I think I've moved past it. And whenever I hear the bathroom water pump roar to life, loud and living, I tell myself, this is the sound I want to hear. Because it's the silence that draws people to the door, to crack it open a few inches and see what they were never meant to see. In 2016, I drove 6 hours north to my father's old cabin, deep in the woods near Ash Creek, a dead mining town on the edge of Bighorn National Forest, Wyoming. The place where he grew up was now just a row of rotting houses, broken signs, and an empty gas station frame standing bare under a washed-out sky. When he was alive, my father rarely mentioned the cabin. He said there was no reason to go back after the town died. He's gone now, and the thought of one last trip to the place where he'd first set his fingernails to build his own roof became something I couldn't put off any longer. I knew I'd find a heap of crooked timber. I also knew I wouldn't sleep properly. But I still packed enough camping gear, some woodworking tools, mold inhibitor, screws, a handsaw, and a good knife. I always had a plan B in mind. If the cabin had collapsed, I'd pitch a tent right in the woods, sleep the night, and head back in the morning. I tucked the car behind an abandoned gas station on the outskirts of Ash Creek, zipped my backpack, and followed a rough 2-mile trail into thick forest. When I reached the clearing where the cabin sat, I stood still for a few seconds, like someone who's just seen a familiar name on a headstone. It was still there. A simple rectangular block of wood, 2 small windows, a low roof, vines and moss clinging to the outer boards like age marks. The door wasn't locked, just a rusty handle. Inside smelled of damp, mice, and wet paper. Trash was strewn in the corners. Can lids, plastic bags, ragged scraps of cloth, faint footprints in the dusty floor. Someone had used the place for shelter once, but it had been a long time. No signs of recent cooking, no fresh ash, no leftover food. I lashed a tarp over the broken window frame, piled the trash in a corner, cleared a flat patch of floor for my sleeping bag. The sun had just slipped behind the pines. Darkness was draining in fast. I lay down, pulled the zipper, and tried to sleep. I heard nothing but wind and the groaning of trunks. But I couldn't sleep more than 30 minutes at a time. Every time I closed my eyes, my body jerked awake, as if someone had touched my shoulder lightly. That discomfort slithered through the night, like something stubborn and alive. I got up at dawn, body heavy as lead, and wondered if the whole trip had been a sentimental mistake. I set up a little stove on the stoop, brewed coffee so strong it was bitter as pitch, then wandered into the woods to wake up. The sky was ashy gray. First light sifted through the canopy like fine dust. I climbed a rise, a little lookout knoll where you could see above the forest. From there, Ash Creek lay far off like a handful of matchboxes spilled on the ground. In the middle of the black windows, one of them lit up, pale yellow, still as an eye opening after years shut. I squinted. A minute later, the light clicked off. A small cold streak touched the back of my neck. I worried a little about the car hidden behind the gas station, but reassured myself. Maybe some urban explorers had stopped by to snap photos and leave. Just a coincidence. I sat on the knoll for another hour watching the sun pull the dew out of the grass, then went back to the cabin to start what I'd promised myself. Patch the roof, clean the boards, scrape the mold. I began outside. Simple, steady work that didn't require thinking. Every time I paused the hammer, that feeling from the night crept back out. I wasn't alone. Not a baseless fear. It was as concrete as a string tied from my back to the tree line. I turned around more than I needed to. The forest stood still. No twigs snapping, no human shapes. I told myself I was tense from lack of sleep, and memories of my father were surfacing at the wrong time. As the light slanted, I went inside, stacked a few logs into the old iron stove, struck a match. That old cast-iron beast caught fire frighteningly easily. The flame climbed like it had been born to do it. Warmth slowly steeped the cabin. I sat close to the stove, listening to the clean tick of dry wood. My head emptied for a rare, brief stretch. I thought of my father, the dead town, my kitchen 6 hours drive away. Warm places with few words. Then at some point in the night, the tick of the stove answered itself with another tick, crackling, scratchy, from the front of the cabin. I turned, held my breath, strained to listen. Not an animal. It had rhythm, intent. When footsteps touched the porch boards, the stove suddenly roared, popping like a string of firecrackers, swallowing every other sound. The fire was talking too loudly for me to hear whatever was standing outside the door. Then came the knocking, 3 beats, firm, and a name that locked my whole world in place. He called my father's name. Something grabbed my spine and tugged me to my feet. I stepped to the door like a hypnotized man. How did he know my father's name? I asked. My voice sounded like someone else's. Who's there? A beat of hesitation. A man's voice, dry as wood, answered. I'm an old friend of the man who built this cabin, hoping I might see him again. Those words struck the softest place. I moved closer to the door, aching to pull the latch, aching for someone to tell me about my father, about who he'd been before he left this place behind. But there was a thorn in his voice. Not sadness, not calm, something else. As if he were performing human feeling from an old script. I asked why he was here. He said he lived below the old town. I hesitated, then told the truth through the wood. I was the son of the man he was looking for, and my father had died. A silence sludged by like mud. "Sorry to hear that, kid," he said, then added a line as if memorized. "Wish I could have seen him one more time." The words he chose were right, but the way he said them made my skin prickle. The apology didn't carry the weight it should have. It was hollow, like a husk of a sentence. He didn't wait long for me to think. "Why don't you open the door so we can talk?" His voice softened a notch, but the current beneath it ran hot. "It's cold out here, son. Warming up by the fire would be nicer." I stood close, my palms wet. Something wasn't straight. Yes, he knew my father's name. Yes, he said he lived in Ash Creek, but we had no proof of anything besides his word. And the thin door between us suddenly felt very important. I didn't answer, and my pause made him change tones. Knock, knock, knock. Heavier now. "Kid, open up." No more please this time. "You gonna leave me out here to freeze? Would your daddy want you treating his friend like this?" My heart pounded like someone drumming on a tabletop. I knelt to pull the camp knife from my pack, tightened my grip on the handle, then backed away from the door one step, then two. He pounded on the door, shouting half threats, half lectures, shedding the harmless old friend shell as fast as fire catching wind. Time stretched immeasurable. At moments I thought the hinges would give. At moments I thought the stove would go out. At moments I thought my father was standing somewhere in the trees, saying nothing at all. Then, suddenly, a furious slam shook the wood, followed by silence. Then the sound of footsteps leaving the porch, sliding into the woods like mist. I didn't sleep. I sat by the stove with the knife on my thigh, eyes fixed on the latch. When gray light swept through the crack between two wall boards, when there was no sign of him around the cabin, I packed in a few minutes. Knife in the pack, water bottle, papers. I headed quickly to Ash Creek, holding my breath until I saw the car still there behind the ruined gas station. I drove straight home without spending too long on the rearview mirror. I'd hoped the trip would give me answers, or at least a way to accept things. But I brought back only more questions. I realized I never truly knew why my father left the town. I'd assumed it was because it withered and everyone moved away. Now I think there might have been something else. Maybe he chose to leave because of the things that stayed. I don't know who the man that night was, why he still hung around, what he wanted from me, or how he knew my father's name. But every alarm in me agreed. He did not mean well. I keep thinking about that razor-thin moment between a turn of the latch and a different decision. If I had let my feelings lead me, if I had opened the door just to hear stories about someone gone, I don't believe I would have left Ash Creek intact. Some deaths don't need a gun. They only need a voice that knows the right name to call, the right rhythm to knock, and the right side of the door on the right night. This happened quite a while ago, back in 2014, when I took a year after graduation to drive around the US, looking for the things maps never tell. When I reached the East Coast, my cousin Ethan sent an invitation that felt like a gift. "Come stay a few days at my cabin on the southern side of the Appalachians. Quiet, safe, use it as you like." After weeks of snatching sleep at cheap motels and truck stops, the thought of a roof belonging to someone I knew felt like winning the lottery. Cabin is modest. Black Bear Ridge, Ethan's name for the place, looked more like a modern vacation home than the rickety log hut you picture. Steel roof, big windows, a wraparound porch with a swing. It sat tucked into a bowl of trees, with a rutted gravel lane as the only connection to the paved road. He said I could stay for free, and I remember thinking, he's awfully trusting to hand me that. I started unloading the car. Big bag, box of food, toolkit. The little long road odds and ends that seemed to multiply in the trunk. On the third trip, I felt it. A faint tingle between my shoulder blades, like a thread being tugged. A man stood at the edge of the woods, right where the light surrendered to shadow. He didn't cross the path and didn't look like he was headed anywhere at all. He simply stood there, and in his line of sight, there was only me and the house. Maybe he wasn't trying to be creepy, I told myself. Maybe there was a neighbor's place tucked behind the trees where I couldn't see. I hauled the last armful in, hit the car lock, and pulled the front door shut. When the deadbolt clicked, he was still there, looking toward the cabin. I texted Ethan. Made it. This place is unreal, and there's a guy standing at the tree line watching. Do you know who that might be? I asked. Then I forgot about the message. I fussed with the kitchen, flipped on a few lights, glanced out at the porch. The sun slid behind the ridge. A blue dusk dropped like a thin curtain. Somewhere in there, my phone buzzed. Ethan's reply. The cabin sits on my 40 acres. The whole property is fenced. No one else is supposed to be there. Those words hollowed me out. Before that, it was easy enough to file the guy under wanderer in the woods. Now, the fact that he shouldn't exist on that plot turned my earlier shrug into naivete. I went to the window. Beyond the pale yellow wash of the porch light was a block of absolute black. I couldn't even tell where the tree line began. I drew the curtain. A chill ran down my back that had nothing to do with the weather. I tried to drown the unease with a movie in the bedroom, volume low. It worked for a bit, until something fluttered at the edge of my vision, a flicker where the curtain didn't quite meet. I glued my eyes to the glass. All I saw was my own faint reflection, a ghost drifting in the dark. Then, footsteps, fast, heavy, crushing through the grass. I lunged to the window, but whatever had just sprinted past had already been swallowed by the dark. Only the sound of steps receding, then gone. Fingers shaking, I called Ethan. I should have called the police first. I still don't know why I didn't. He told me to dial 911 immediately. I hung up and did. Given how remote the place was, the deputy arrived with startling speed, headlights sweeping wide white arcs across the lawn. The guy had been gone a while. We both understood the limits. He couldn't risk bushwhacking through the forest at night for an intruder who'd already melted into the dark. If he comes back, call us. Keep everything locked, he said, voice apologetic but practical. Then I was alone again. I thought about leaving, but picturing myself making trip after trip under the porch light, turning into a lit-up target in the night, felt worse than holing up inside. So I stayed. I checked the windows, checked the front door, checked the slider, then checked again. Past midnight, maybe around 1, I was still pacing, forcing my brain to accept the fact that the locks were set. But stalling only carried me so far. Finally, I killed every light in the house, retreated to the bedroom, turned the thumb lock on the knob, got in bed, and drifted off. 30 minutes, tops. I jolted awake far too early. The kind of early where your body is alert before your mind is. A sign your brain has heard something. The dark was thick and clockless. Around 4 a.m. There was no way I was getting back to sleep without doing a round. I switched on the hall light and stood still, listening. Wind clawed at the thin window frames, whistling through gaps like someone blowing across a bottle. I took a step, then halfway down the hall, I heard it. A dull thump, thump at the far end of the house. I already knew the layout. Down there was a little library nook with built-ins, and beyond that, the kitchen. I crept closer. In the hall, light stretching long, a shadow slid across where the floor meets the base of the shelves. It went still. I went still. A few seconds, as heavy as wet concrete. Then it moved again, this time fully out. A man at the end of the hallway, one shoulder slanted, the same thin, narrow frame I'd seen at the tree line when the sun went down. I whipped around, bolted into the bedroom, slammed the door, twisted the lock. The silence on the other side was so dense my ears rang. I waited for the explosive rush of footsteps, the crack of wood, a shoulder slam. Nothing. Instead came slow, even steps tapping down the hall, stopping right outside the door. He stood there. Breathing? I couldn't tell over the sound of my heart pounding in my throat. The phone sat snug in my clenched hand. I could call 911 again. But the thought of speaking, of letting him hear me and decide that now was the moment to do whatever he'd come to do, tied my tongue. I chose the bad plan that was still a plan. The window. I grabbed the keys off the table, slid the latch, pushed the window up as quietly as I could, and slipped out into the night. Cold slapped my face. I ran. Dew turned the grass into slick blades under my soles. I flung myself into the car, turned the key. The engine caught. The rear tires churned gravel until the tail kicked out. I didn't look in the rear view. I only stopped when I saw the red-blue flash of a cruiser looping back at the end of the lane. When the deputy swept the cabin again, the man, of course, was gone. He'd come in through a window on the far side with a busted lock. Whether he'd broken it or it was just old, no one knew. He pointed out the bedroom lock I'd trusted. A push-button bathroom latch, the kind you can open with a paperclip. He could have walked in whenever he wanted. He said gently, but plainly. Going out the window probably saved you. The worst part arrived late, when the last obvious truth finally got said. He'd been there since I set foot on the property. He was standing at the tree line when I hauled my bags. He circled the house while I watched a movie. He ran past the window when I jumped up to check. He waited long enough to learn which doors I locked, which lights I left on, which room I slept in. I don't know what he wanted, and I'm lucky I'll never have to know. I thought the cabin would give me a clean quiet between highways. What I brought back was a feeling that won't wash off. That someone can pick you out of an open space, step over a private fence, watch you memorize the floor plan of a house that isn't yours, and sync their breathing to yours in the dark. People like to say the woods are scary. No, the woods are honest. They tell you exactly what they are. What's scary is people. The one who can stand still the whole evening and only move when you blink. The one whose presence swells to fill 40 acres, a hallway, and for one long, unending minute, the air just the other side of your bedroom door. I see you.